This is Khari Wyatt, Playwright. If you'd like to learn more about my play and the other zip code plays that my piece is a part of and support Antaeus Theater Company, watch this video. I fell in love with theater actually as far back as 10, 11 years old. I had an older cousin who went to the School of Arts, Duke Ellington School of the Arts in Washington, D.C. And I used to tag along with him and his friends, and they used to do street theater. So they would go to Georgetown and Columbia Heights, other areas in D.C., and kids from the school would put on shows in like empty parking lots or on street corners, and I would help, coil cables and carry boxes and lights and things like that. So actually, I came up in the theater in the backstage area. So, when I got to college at Howard University, one of those friends was the technical director at the campus theater, Crampton Auditorium, which was a 1,500-seat theater. And I used to work stage crew for him from the time I was a sophomore till the time I graduated. And, flying in drops, hanging drops, going in the ceiling, hanging lights, all of that kind of daredevil stuff, running cables, hanging mics, loading in, loading out, all times of the day and night between classes, coming in, coming out. So my background in theater was technical. And working on the shows, even though I was a creative person and I appreciated seeing different types of shows, concerts, plays, fashion shows, and that type of thing, I never really thought of myself as going into the creative end of theater. I just thought, it's nice to be here at the show. Everybody else is out there in the audience. Here I am backstage working with people and, hobnobbing with the actors and the musicians and the singers and the promoters and things like that. And I guess when I got to Columbia, I got my master's in film from Columbia, and I decided to take a playwriting class as an elective because I felt like there was a part of creativity that I hadn't explored. And as a writer, I have written short stories, I have written essays, I've written screenplays, TV pilots. I hadn't tried to write a play. So I said, that bothered me. So I said, let me go and see if I can learn how to, write a play, see if I'm good at it. And I had a teacher named Romulus Lenny, who, as it turns out, was a prominent playwright. I had no idea at the time how prominent he was. I knew he had a play on Broadway. So in my young mind, I'm like 23 at the time in this class, 23, 24. And I'm like, okay, yeah, Romulus had a play on Broadway. And now he's at Columbia. They let him teach because he had this play on Broadway. Really cool guy, really thoughtful person. He always seemed to have something going on in his mind, but yet at the same time, he took in everything everyone said. He always looked you in the eye. So it's like he had multiple things going on, but you always felt like you were seen and heard. But I struggled with writing plays because coming from the film aspect of school, everything was show, don't tell. Less dialogue, more action. You don't need them to say everything. Then getting into the playwriting course, it seemed that all anyone did was talk. So it's like, my God, we have pages and pages and pages of dialogue and monologues, and it's like one location. It's this one stage, this one or two sets on this stage, and this whole play is going to take place within these parameters. And I just could not catch on. Like, I wrote a couple scenes that were decent, and our end of the semester project was to write a one-act play. So anywhere from 35 to 50 pages. And long story short, I did not do that. I went to meet with Romulus and I said, hey, man, I'm not going to be able to kick that out. Can I turn in one of my screenplays for my final project? And he was nice enough to accept that. He was like, I understand. Of course I will. And I said, I promise you, Romulus, before I leave the earth, I'll write a full-length play. And cut to probably like 10 years later, I'm in acting class, and the teacher's like, I want you guys to also not just act, but I want you to focus on other aspects of theater. I want you to bring scenes in and direct if you like, write scenes for other people to direct, or write a scene and direct it yourself. So I said, oh, and I remember Romulus, so let me try to write a one-act play, which I did, and I brought it in, and I directed scenes from it, and it was terrible. I mean, it went over like a train crash. So I was like, okay, I'm not whatever. So I'm still focusing on TV writing and movie writing and short story writing. And then about '08, a couple years after that class, I had been working at a law firm for my day job. And after 5 years there, I got laid off when the economic downturn hit in '08. And that set a whole lot of chain reaction of just bad, negative events like car repossession and moving from this apartment to that apartment to a friend's couch. And I wound up going to a blood plasma center and earning money, donating blood, not donating, but selling blood plasma, for about what turned out to be about $50 a week. And one day I happened to be on the donation bed, and I always had a notebook with me. And these characters just started talking to me. And I just started writing down this dialogue. And eventually that turned into a full-length play called Some Type of Ecstasy. And eventually, a few years after that, it wound up being a semifinalist for the Eugene O'Neill National Playwrights Conference. So that was my first play. And from there, I've written like 3 other plays and a couple little one acts and little 10-minute plays. So my love has grown the more I've written. Every time I write one, it just sparks an idea for the next one. And so that's how I fell in love with theater. Now it's just like I miss theater so much. I miss being able to go and sit in that black box. I miss being able to go to, the Kirk Douglas or the CTG complex and see a play or see a show and be with the people. I mean, it's the closest thing to a concert for storytellers. There's nothing like live and that energy and that anticipation. My process for writing plays, really, it can be sparked by anything, the initial idea. I mean, in general, I deal with issues of race and class, societal structures, really the pursuit of love, not necessarily romantic, although it can be that within certain characters, in certain pieces, but just in general. How do we treat each other right? Why do we feel the way we feel? How do we arrive at our conclusions? How do we change? How do we grow? How do we not? And why? So I could be watching, some cable news, or I could be on the street taking a walk and a bus drives by with an ad for something and it sparks an idea. Usually for me, dialogue is first, like a character would just start talking to me. I'll have an idea in my mind of things that I usually talk about. And then some character would just say, hey, blah, 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 blah. And I write that down. And then another character will say, blah, 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 blah. And then we're off and running. After that initial bolt of energy, then I'm like, okay, let me start to shape this. What are these characters? What is this story actually about? And from that point, I'll go back and start new and go forward until I have a draft. Antaeus, I originally found a friend of mine was in the Playwrights Lab there. And so they said, I think you would be good for the Playwrights Lab. And so I applied to the Playwrights Lab, and this was a couple years ago, and I was selected to be in the next cohort of the Playwrights Lab with myself and about 7 other playwrights. And so from there, we meet every Tuesday evening, between September and May, with sometimes off of holidays or various other meetings. But for the most part, we do it by fall, winter, spring. And it's every Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. And some of the most talented people in the world who write plays are in the Antaeus Playwrights Lab. I mean, people who have been produced all over the country, all over the world. And you come in and you share about 20 pages of work at a time. And you get feedback after the reading of your work. And, there's a lot of very intelligent, just well-read, well-experienced people who just tell you, hey, this popped for me in your piece. I heard this, I heard that. I like this worked for me, or this pulled me out of it. I don't know if that worked the way you intended for it to work. And it's very communal and a very warm atmosphere. And so that's how I became acquainted with Antaeus. I think they chose podcasts right now because that's kind of the latest zeitgeist. Like a lot of places are doing audio plays, and I think it was a way for Antaeus to incorporate actors and directors and use a different form than people have been used to previously. And for me, I loved it. Actually, it was always a dream of mine to have an audio play. When I was growing up as a kid, I used to go to books. When I would go to bookstores and buy books, certain bookstores also sold tapes of old time radio shows. And I used to buy those and listen to them. You know, I'd go home and I'd wait till the night and I would turn off all the lights and put this tape in my boom box, and I would listen to this, you know, this audio play from 1945 or 1948 or 1955, you know, The Shadow and Suspense Theater and all those types of things, you know, Jack Benny. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is awesome, because it sparks so much imagination in the listener. You know, what are they wearing? What do they look like? How tall is that guy? You know, what does that woman really look like? You know, what kind of car is that drove, that you heard the horn honk? You know, what's actually happening in the city? What's that block look like? What's that house look like? So it really, even though you're getting a story and you're getting a beginning, middle, and end, and you have all the sound effects and whatever music cues are involved, it really, in an easy way, makes the listener a part of the story. You're in that club. You're in that house when that burglar comes. You know, you are next to that ghost who is next to the guy who you're listening to. You're in that field when the aliens are coming down. You know, so it makes the listener a part of the story. You're an actor in that story. Your imagination is drawing you into that story, and it's because it's just voices and effects. You know, so it was always a dream of mine. So when I got selected, I was overjoyed, because I had been thinking actually doing on my own and fund it. And lo and behold, this opportunity came. And so thank God. The idea came originally, Kitty Swink and Bill Brochtrup, the artistic directors of the Antaeus, put out a call to the Playwrights Lab that they were going to be doing audio plays based around zip codes in Los Angeles. And the idea basically was to give people slices of different areas of the city, slices of life from different areas of the city. And I chose for my pitch, South Central Los Angeles, you know, predominantly black area of town, black, brown area of town. I felt like that was a place I would like to focus my story. And so I submitted the pitch by the deadline, which was this past summer in July. And I was blessed to be selected. And from there, the idea basically came about because I read a book by Donald Bogle, who's a historian, film and television historian, black man, called Bright Boulevard, Bold Dreams. And the book basically encapsulated the history of black Hollywood from the 1920s up until like the late 1950s. And all the people in and around black Hollywood, and all the businesses and business owners and things such as that in this section of Central Avenue around the Dunbar Hotel specifically, which was like the hub of black life in Los Angeles, up through about the late 40s, you know, in the early 50s until integration happened. And then people started to, you know, drift to other parts of the city to live, to go to clubs on Sunset Strip and other places in Los Angeles, which kind of killed the community. A lot of businesses closed down and things just changed. People moved out of the neighborhood. Things went downhill. Crime got raised up by that. And so I thought of that book and I'm like, you know what? Let me talk about people of that time period, the late 50s, when things had changed, and just give people a slice of life of a few characters from this neighborhood. And so that's where the idea came from, originally out of that book, and wanting to incorporate that area of the city and incorporate also a little bit of history, not just of that area, but of America in that time period. It's about a black man who wants to be an author, who went to Paris and returns from Paris after a year and a half, and finds the wife that he left is not the same woman that he left behind. And so that's the crux of it. And what happens when he returns and finds that his wife is different, has been changed by what's going on in America. And her reaction to how he has changed from actually pursuing his dream somewhere else without her and then returning into the mix. I would love for the audience to get out of the play a sense of the time, the late 1950s, in this particular community, how things changed in the broad sense, how individuals could have been affected in another sense because of the racism of the time, because of the roadblocks to opportunities, to dreams, and also historical context for what's going on in America in a broader sense. Without giving away too much, part of what's going on in the play is related to the Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama. And there's a plot point that deals with what's happening in South Central and its relation to the Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama. So I want people to get a sense of the time and space, the racial climate, the social climate through these individual characters, and how much is relatable to what's going on today. Unfortunately, although a lot of things have gotten better, the undergird of racism has remained. And now it seems like we're going a little bit, not even a little bit, we're going backwards. And now it's become suitable again for the racists to be loud about it. And we have someone in the White House who's supposedly supposed to be the leader of America, who purposely, I believe he is a white nationalist, and this is why he does what he does. But at the very least, wants to curry favor with white nationalism because they support him. And because they support him, he doesn't want to do anything or say anything against that. I think that he doesn't say anything against it because he is that. As the Department of Justice lawsuit against him and his father for housing discrimination all the way back in the 70s attests. So that's what I want people to get out of it. How things, the climate of the times, and how it's relatable to today. I think it's always very important to have a diversity of voices, and especially in theater, because of the immediacy of theater, because you go and it's a communal event and you're together with people who you might not otherwise be in contact with or be sitting next to. And that diversity of voices is important because there might be somebody who comes to a play of mine, or they might listen to this audio podcast of my play and have no idea about South Central, and specifically the Central Avenue corridor and what it meant to the Black community back in the 1930s and 40s, and how integration changed that dynamic in the 50s, and how Black people were not disconnected from each other in various parts of the country. Something happening in Montgomery, Alabama affected a Black person in Seattle, and affected a Black person in Nebraska, and affected a Black person on the Central Avenue corridor. So there's not a disconnection. And to hear the stories of my people, my community, and the community of the Latinx people, or the indigenous people, or the Asian people. I went to a production at East West Players of Viet Gone. I did not know that. I know of Vietnam. I've heard stories of Vietnam, but this specific story, I had no idea about. And I only know about it because I went to this play at East West Players, and they put this production on and presented it to the public. And so that's the import of having a diversity of voices. I look at theaters, and oftentimes you go to a theater and you see their schedule for the year. What shows are they doing for the year? And it'll usually be like, between 5 and 8 shows, depending on the size of the theater. And oftentimes there's no diversity, And if they have one August Wilson play or one Lynn Nottage play, that will be considered a great season. However, if you reverse that and you had Lynn Nottage and Dominique Morisseau and August Wilson and Charles Fuller and, you know, Jeremy O'Harris, and then two Shakespearean plays, the audience would wonder, what are they doing? What are they trying to do? This is insane. Is there some kind of special thing going on with black people this year? You know, but yet we're all supposed to be Americans, right? So why would it be strange? You know? So I think it's not just the theaters. I think the theaters program to their audience, to their subscribers. So what is it about the subscribers who I would bet 99.9% of them would say they're liberals, don't take to seeing diverse voices the way you would think they would, being people who would classify themselves as liberal, or people who would probably tell you are accepting of all people, love to hear stories from all people, but yet the artistic directors and the executive directors of theaters across the country can't program a season that I just described, right? And if that season was done, that would leave out Latinx playwrights. That would leave out indigenous playwrights. That would leave out Asian playwrights. We live in a nation with many, many different ethnicities, but yet when you go to the theater, it's not reflected. So I think like I said, and that leaves us from a cultural standpoint bereft, because you don't hear my story that represents my community. You don't hear Viet Gone. You know, you don't get the Zoot Suit riots. You don't get those types of productions on a consistent basis, where you are woven into the fabric of a community that you might not be a part of. But if you could hear the stories, it might change the way you think and the way you feel about the world at large. I didn't see Hamilton in the theater because I couldn't afford to pay rent money for a ticket. I saw it on Disney Plus. I subscribed to Disney Plus specifically to see Hamilton. In my mind, I'm like, you know, my wife had seen it, friends had seen it. And I said, you know, come on, it can't be that good. I mean, I'm sure it's good, but it can't be that good. And I watched this production on Disney Plus, and I'm like, damn, that was fantastic. I looked at these people, and I'm like, these are my peers. Hip hop, the swagger, the innovation. Like, who thinks to do Hamilton as a hip hop musical? But yet Lin-Manuel did it. And all of these great singers and actors and dancers came and created something that was so specifically unique. It was American history, but through the lens of people who are marginalized. And I think when you deal with people who have been othered, you get a certain heartbeat in their creative output that changes minds and hearts, or at the very least, gins up a great deal of excitement. I think that's been the case musically, cinematically, and now you see it in theater. It's been that way in fashion. You know, I think the world does not turn without the creativity of Black Americans, specifically. Because of what we've been through in this country, the creative output is something that's phenomenal, unique, instructive, and different all at the same time. And so I feel like you need these different voices, not just for that, but for the substance. You know, as I said earlier, you might have grown up in a small town in Kansas, or a small town in Missouri. You might not have ever been around any Black people. The representation of Blackness might be my audio play. It might be Hamilton. It might be a film. It might be an album. But it makes you start to think, because it gets you out of your comfort zone. It gets you into a place where you have to listen to somebody who is not like you, who have experienced things that you have not experienced. And even if you don't like it, you have to acknowledge it. And when you acknowledge it, from there, things can start to change and grow. Antaeus is really important. Antaeus is a classics theater. So they do all of the O'Neills and the Tennessee Williams and Shakespeare and so on and so forth. And it keeps that canon alive. And that's important because you don't want the origins of theater and the canonical nature of theater to be lost. But now what we're starting to see are an incorporation of modernity. And you're starting to see modern playwrights start to come through Antaeus as well. A couple seasons ago, they did an adaptation that Nambi Kelly wrote of Native Son. That was the hit. And then last season, it was 8 Nights by Jennifer Mizell. And The Abuelas by Stephanie Allison Walker. All well received, all modern plays by modern playwrights. Among the classic work. And so what's important about Antaeus is that they see the importance of history, the historical canon of theater, but also the incorporation of the future of theater. And then the Playwrights Lab springing forth and work coming out of that Playwrights Lab and getting to their subscribers, to their audience. And so other theaters, other smaller theaters in the city, nonprofit theaters and for-profit theaters as well. Because, you know, as much as I love going to see a show at the Taper or the Amundsen, there's only so many slots. There's a lot of playwrights. And so these smaller theaters in the area allow playwrights, allow actors, allow directors to continue to hone our craft, while at the same time giving the world a new story, a new way of thinking, a new way of questioning what you think and why you think what you think, or why you feel the way you feel. And without the smaller theaters like Moving Arts or Circle X, that doesn't happen. You know, the other playwrights, I've known them through the Playwrights Lab, so I know how extremely talented they are. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how they handle the subject matter in their plays. You know, Angela J. Davis, Nana Agrawal, Deb Height, Alex Goldberg, and Steve Surpass. And their zip codes run the gamut from Santa Monica, Sun Valley, Pacific Palisades, downtown Los Angeles, and Westwood. And there are various, some are magical realism, some are historical, and I'm really looking forward to see how they handled those stories. I don't want to give away their stuff, but I just wanted to mention them because, you know, there's some besides my play, there's 5 other great plays that are coming to you. I would love for the audience to come and find my play and the other Zip Code plays, because what you're going to get is a diverse group of voices in age, ethnicity, talking about various characters specific to the zip codes that they deal with and the areas of town that they deal with in Los Angeles. And if you're an Angeleno, some things are going to be familiar. You're going to learn some things about areas of the city that you didn't know. And if you're from out of the city, across the country, you're going to learn some stuff about Los Angeles, historical things that some things I was surprised to learn in other people's plays. And so I feel like you're going to get a diverse body, age, gender, ethnicity, and some really compelling characters. And within those characters and extending outward, stories that pull you in. Hey, this is Khari Wyatt, playwright. And I just want you to come and support the Zip Code plays produced by Antaeus Theater Company, debuting on November 12th on various podcast systems, Spotify, Apple, and also on the Antaeus website. And you can hear slices of Los Angeles through myself and 5 other wonderful plays from 5 other playwrights. who are based here in Los Angeles and doing theater here in Los Angeles, and we would love your support.